Welcome, everyone, to the second of a webinar series hosted quarterly where the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the Kentucky chapter of the American Planning Association will be discussing a wide array of topics related to how we can take a more equitable and inclusive lens to the planning profession. These webinars will be held live via Zoom, and it is also being recorded for later viewing at APA-KY.org. This webinar is eligible for one AICP credit and will count as one equity credit. My name is Josh Summer. I am the Planner 3 with the City of Paducah, Kentucky, as well as the co-chair of the Kentucky APA DEI Committee, and I will be your moderator for today's September 26, 2023 session. During this webinar, we will be discussing where the sidewalk ends, the lack of diversity in the planning profession. The discussion will center around how to reach students to enter into the planning profession and how to increase diversity. We will also discuss the hiring, retaining, and recruiting of DEI candidates in both the public and private sectors. These conversations are about listening to others, even if their opinions and viewpoints might differ from your own. Respect others' views. We all have the right to an opinion. Being okay to not feel like you fully understand a topic or the wording or terminology around it, and that being okay. But finally, keeping an open mind. Everyone here is on a journey of understanding, and we are all coming into this at different points of entry. So thank you for sharing your lunch hour with us today, and let's meet today's panelists. So we have 4 great panelists today. Sharmali Reddy, Executive Director of Planning and Development Services of Kenton County. Ryan Holmes, Project Manager with EHI Consultants. Dr. Leah Hollstein, an Associate Professor in the School of Planning, contained within the College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning at the University of Cincinnati. And Dr. Danilo Palazzo, Director of the School of Planning at the University of Cincinnati. Panelists, thank you for joining us this morning. We will begin today with a brief overview of your background, and can you tell us a little bit about how you see the future of planning as it relates to a historically low number of planners entering our profession?
Thank you, Josh. I will get us started. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody from wherever you're joining us. My journey to the planning field happened by chance, just like I think for a lot of people. I have an undergrad in architecture from India and happened to sit in a class, in an urban planning class, and really loved the idea of it and chose to do a project in that field, and then ended up at UC for my master's in planning. So I share that to share that my journey wasn't intentional. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a planner. I didn't even know what planning meant or that it was an option as a profession. And talking to a lot of planners, it seems like that is the journey for a lot of people. And so when we talk about the future of planning and where it's going, I think that narrative probably needs to change a little bit so that we can be a little bit more intentional. And I think as planners, we're taught and trained to be positive about the outlook of our future and our profession. So I think with a little bit more intentional effort, we can probably change the trajectory of where the profession is going. So that's just a little bit of my background and what I think about the future of planning.
This is Ryan Holmes with EHI Consultants, and thank you all for joining today. But it's no secret, I'm the son of a planner, so I kind of grew up in the profession, and so I've always seen, the impacts of what advocacy could do for a neighborhood. But I really didn't get too passionate about it until I graduated from University of Louisville, and then I was talking to my father of mine, and eventually I went to the University of Cincinnati to do my master's in urban planning. But I'd say ever since 2020, I've seen a shift in sort of the dynamics and the demographics of who's getting involved in neighborhood planning, comprehensive planning, things like that. And so I'm excited to see where the future holds. I I think younger people are getting more civically engaged. And so I think it's, they're no longer just sitting back and waiting to see what's happening to their neighborhoods and to their cities. They're taking a more proactive approach. And so, I'm excited to see where this, what the future holds for us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. So my background, how I got to planning and sort of what my interests are is I actually have a master's degree in landscape architecture, and I practiced that for a couple of years. And then I decided while I liked practice, I was more interested in some larger ideas, some theoretical ideas. I decided to do a doctorate in planning. And my focus, because my landscape architecture background is in environmental planning, sustainability, resiliency. And I see that, sometimes there's a gap between these larger ideas and the actual implementation on the ground, as well as how sustainability and resiliency play out in actual lived communities. And so, that's sort of my interest as it relates to not as many planners coming into the profession, or a lack of people maybe intentionally getting into it, that, we have a real problem with just exposure to what planning is and how people can get involved and be leaders and influencers in their, influencers in the best sense, but in their own neighborhoods.
Hello, welcome everybody. My background is in architecture. I was born in Italy and raised in Milano, so I went to the Polytechnic di Milano to get my degree in architecture. And the concentration that I decided to take in my last 2 years was in urbanism, which is another way to talk about planning, but from a different angle, from a different point of view, more from, Europe was more influenced by urbanists than from planners. I taught at the Polytechnic Milano after my PhD in planning from the University of Venice, and I taught planning and urban design to Italian and international students, and then I came here in Cincinnati as director of the School of Planning. So that's a brief bio of my background. As an educator, I have to be optimistic about the future of planning. I am the director of the School of Planning, and with a group of faculty, we are trying actually to understand what is the future of planning. And so we are always trying to adapt our teaching within the specific class or studios, or adding programs or certificates in order to go and meet the need of the society. So again, I have to be optimistic, and I am optimistic about the future of planning, but it's not something that we will have just by grace. We need to work in order to improve the future of planning.
Great, thank you all. Dr. Palazzo and Dr. Hollstein have co-authored a book called the Routledge Companion to Professional Awareness and Diversity in Planning Education with Dr. Stephen Deco with the University of Memphis. If you could please tell us a little bit about what is contained in your book, it would make a great segue into today's questions. Dr. Palazzo and Dr. Hollstein, you all are muted.
Of course we are.
Excellent.
Okay.
Can we share the screen?
Can we
please?
share the screen now, Kareem, please?
Well, I'll go ahead and get started while we wait to share the screen. A few years ago, we did an activity here in Cincinnati with a high school that's located just adjacent to the University of Cincinnati campus. It's Hughes High School, and we were able to work with a couple of classes of 7th and 8th grade students. I believe they were 7th and 8th grade students for a 2-week. the activity lasted for 2 weeks, but it was, I think, 2 days each in the 2 different weeks. We would visit it with these students, and we got them interested in thinking about how they might be able to make positive changes to their built environment. We tried not to use the term planning so much because it can be ambiguous and it might not be energizing. So we, thought about, ideas around change and transformation. And the students generated their own topic interest that they wanted to work on. And that was about a nearby detached playing field, that the school doesn't have its own playing field. It has one about a block away that they have to walk to down a very steep, sometimes not safe street. And so they understood that feeling of safety, both on the walk to and from the field, and then actually in the field, which is located in a sort of valley below the school's the height. And so in this 2-week project, the students came up with sort of idea generation, getting information, doing a survey, talking with teachers and other students, coming up with proposals. And at the very end, they presented their ideas to their teachers and their principals. So we told of this project in a paper that we then published. And the paper was, in doing this paper, we also surveyed on the internet other professional organizations like the APA, the AIA, and other universities that were doing this sort of outreach and information and awareness programming. So that's included in our paper as well. And the paper was well accepted. We decided that we wanted to use it to attract other experiences that people were having around professional awareness of planning activities that were happening, as we realized that the problems that we were having, that we see in awareness of the profession, it wasn't unique. It was being appreciated elsewhere, and there were other people who were sort of trying to tackle the issue.
Yeah, and so after the paper, we did realize that we were not alone as the School of Planning of looking at some phenomena like lack of diversity among our students, a reduced number and declining in students. And so we try to ask other people in other countries, in these countries, from different colleges, to write a book with us. And so we edited this Routledge Companion to Professional Awareness and Diversity in Planning Education. It just came out in May. And the reason why we started looking at to collect these papers, these chapters, was because of the lack of racial diversity in planning, in the planning profession. You can see here that in the first diagram, we have the US population of 2020, and you can see the US planning practitioner in 2019 just below that. The teal color is African-American, and you can see actually that there's a little representation of that, while there's a larger representation of white people in the planning practitioner and in American Planning Association. The US graduates and US undergraduate planning students, these are data from the PAB, the Planning Accreditation Board. You can see that are closer in some way to the first diagram, that of the US population. But as I told you before, there was a decline of students in grad schools as well in undergrad school, with an increase of numbers of schools and programs. Actually, we went from 14 to 16 undergraduate program, and from 64 to 72 graduate programs. So there was a shrinking of the population. Why racial diversity is important? In the very first slide that we shown, the very first slide on the right was Ed Olms and Ryan Olms that actually presented to those students in Hughes High School before we started the workshop. And they were the representing the community of that school. And so in that minor or little example, the fact that Ryan and Ed were there to present, it gives some legitimation to the activity that we were doing. Probably if me and Leah were going there, we wouldn't have the same kind of reactions and impact. The other thing is the fact that there's a little awareness about planning. These are, and I don't want to go through this, but this is a list of description of urban planning from Wikipedia that places urban planning within the field of engineering. And if you have a kid that is looking for a college major and doesn't know where to go, they probably will look some of this website like College Major 101, ACT, My Major, Niche, and so on. And planning is sometimes with the dance and theater, sometimes is under social science, sometimes is with the architecture. So there's a lack of clarity about what is planning. So these are the two, so the lack of awareness that we suffer, especially because we have an undergraduate program, so we have to attract high school students in our program. That was one of our, let's say, input. But the other thing is that we do not have enough representation in our profession. Yes, sorry, stop sharing.
Thank you all so much for that. That was very enlightening and really sets the stage for the discussion that we're going to be having today. So with that, let's get into some of the questions. Audience members, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A functionality, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. Additionally, contact information for each panelist will be provided in case we don't get to your question. So Sharma-Lee, let's start with you. Immigrants to the United States can be a great asset to the planning profession, bringing with them new experiences and a fresh set of eyes. How can the planning profession engage immigrants to become planners in their new home?
Thank you for that question, Josh, because it allows me to share my story as an immigrant to the country. And the reason I shared it is just to give you an understanding of what it takes to actually immigrate into the US and find a job and be in this profession. So I came to the US to get my master's at University of Cincinnati. And so I came in on a student visa, which really qualifies you only to basically get your education. So when I had to switch from a student visa to a work visa, which is an H-1 visa, and that's what you need in order to work, I had a little bit of a hard time finding a job. So instead of going into a work visa, I had to go into an interim process, which is called the optional practical training. It's a 1 year, time period that's given to a student to find a position pertaining to their profession. So that was a year. And then to apply for your work visa, you actually have to find an employer that is willing to sponsor you. Now I'm in the public sector, and it was very difficult at the time, and I imagine it still is, to find a lot of sponsors, for an immigrant visa. So that was an H-1 process. And then after that came the permanent residency. And then after that came the citizenship, which happened only because I married an American citizen. And all of this on an expedited timeline was about 8 years for me. So just to put in context of how long it takes to actually get from point A to point B as an immigrant, let alone in the planning profession and in the public sector, it's a long process. So I think what I would share is that, one, to not write off immigrants because of a visa requirement or anything like that. There's absolutely ways to work through that. I was fortunate enough to find a job in Pennsylvania with a township manager that was extremely supportive, and not only agreed to support my visa, but also taught me the culture and the way of doing things in the US, which again is very different if you grow up in another country. And so I would say, we have to keep our options open and be supportive of these processes. These are all legal processes, by the way, to come to the country and be good citizens and give back to the community in different ways. So any awareness that we can create for ourselves about the immigration process, or ask questions when you get an applicant that it doesn't already have that immigration status, to ask questions about what the process is, what does it cost, long-term commitments, things like that. There's always ways to work around that. So I just wanted to share that I think that is going to be a big way in supporting and keeping more immigrants in the planning profession.
Thank you for that, Sharmali. That is very insightful, and we got to remember that our immigrant friends are the foundation of this country overall. So, Dr. Palazzo, as described in your book mentioned previously, the COI field exercise brought out the planner in young people. How have you seen this exercise and exercises such as this generate interest in the planning profession?
Thank you for the question, Josh. And I want to tell Sharmili that actually in 2016, we changed the classification of instructional program from planning to a STEM discipline. So we are under sustainable studies, which means actually that international students that are coming here have a 3-year OPT now. So it means that actually, and that was something, again, as I said before, we need to figure out the best for our students, for the education, considering that the data that I shared with you before in terms of declining of students is actually more evident in the domestic students. We have less domestic students, but we have more in general in US, based on the PAB data, more international students. So we have to consider that we are not just educating international students to go back to their country, but actually has Sharmili stay here. I mean, I'm an immigrant myself, and so I know how hard it's sometimes to fit in this country. But anyway, I mean, the COI field exercise, as well as the DEP camp that we organize every year, together with some experiences that we have learned putting together this book, are the way to open up an interest of young kids on planning. And not necessarily, again, Leah was saying before, we haven't used the term planning when we were at Hughes High School because we didn't want to just put a label in front of that. We are working in cities. We're working with urban communities. We're working on green elements. We're working on public spaces. I mean, there are housing. There are so many terms that actually place, are layers of planning, and maybe those are clearer than just using planning. I mean, I'm joking anytime I meet with students about planning. I said, this is not about wedding planning. This is not about financial planning. This is not about party planning. I mean, this is urban planning. We have to use, always urban, regional, sustainable, local, every term that in some way create the planning for what it is. I mean, or provide an explanation of planning of what it is.
Thank you for that, Dr. Palazzo. So, Dr. Hollstein, we applaud you for working with your local APA chapter on an Adopt-a-Class program. Can you please describe what that is and how it relates to the future of planning?
Right. So great. Thank you, Josh. So the Cincinnati chapter of the APA here in town has just participated during this past school year for the first time in the Adopt-a-Class program. The Adopt-a-Class program dates to 2003, and it's active in Cincinnati, Public schools, but I just looked this up yesterday. It's also active in Boone County schools and in Newport Independent Schools and Covington Independent Schools over in Kentucky. So there's no reason people in Kentucky not to be involved in this. Adopt a Class is a Cincinnati area nonprofit organization that focuses on, I'm reading from their website here, facilitating personal sustained connections between those in the business community and students from pre-K through 8th grade. So what we have done, and we'll do again this year, is we work with 8th grade students at the Academy of World Languages in the Evanston neighborhood here, one of our 52 Cincinnati neighborhoods. We're in the classroom for about an hour once a month, and there's an optional half-day field trip that can take place at some point during the year. We engage in activities with the students, which introduce them to general ideas about planning. So these are things like land use decision-making, about park locations. We might use markers and colored pencils. We do larger urban design activities using Legos. We've done one activity which went over a lot better than I thought it would, which is role-playing community members at a public engagement exercise. We teach them about surveys. We had students take the surveys home to their parents and their classmates and their teachers. So it's a lot about informing them what we do for a living, but also about teaching them a bit about planning and what planners do, and then engaging them in some version of some of the more fun planning activities. It's really rewarding and engaging. And some, the students might not end up being planners, but if they get to have more of an interest in their surroundings and the knowledge that they can be influential and have some agency over their lives and their communities, then, that's sort of what we're going for. And I would encourage anybody who has the ability to do so, to do something, a similar sort of activity.
Thank you, Dr. Hollstein. So, Ryan, as we are all aware, sometimes it takes champions to bring initiatives across the finish line. What are some of your ideas to bring DEI individuals into the planning profession?
Yeah, I always think about mentorship opportunities, and I say mentorship instead of internship opportunities because I think internship implies that you have to work for EHI or whatever the case may be. But I think as a mentor, that really broadens our reach. And so I think about how EHI grew as a company, and we started in '95 out of Lexington with one office, and now we've been able to grow into 4 offices in 4 different cities. And I think a big part of that was because of the mentorship opportunity we were provided back in, I'd say, 2004, 2005. And that's actually how we grew into our civil engineering side of things. And so we partnered up with one of the larger engineering firms in Kentucky. And so they really took us under their wing. And, they showed us how civil engineering and urban planning kind of coincide with each other. And we actually ended up hiring one of their engineers who now pretty much runs our whole entire engineering division. And so what we try to do now is sort of, how do we, replicate that on a smaller scale? And so we've worked within the past 3 years, we've worked with a couple of architects. And so, they've come to us and saying, hey, we understand that design, affects, it has social implications. And so how do you replicate that from an urban planning perspective to the architectural degrees? And so those 2 students, one was from the UK and the other one's from the University of Minnesota, they came to us with 2 different projects. And so we were able to actually partner up. And so that really started to bridge their careers and further their careers. And so what we want to do is continue that opportunity of mentorships and bringing them in and say, hey, this is what the planning profession is. Even if you're not directly working for us, we still want to give them those opportunities moving forward.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. So this question is for both Sharmali and Ryan. What can be done in both the public and private sectors to hire, retain, and recruit DEI candidates into our profession?
Josh, maybe I'll get us started on this question. So there's a couple things obviously that we can and we should do better as a profession. Certainly, if we have a planning school such as we do, University of Cincinnati in our neck of the woods, having a strong relationship with our local planning school, I think, is extremely important. I cannot tell you the number of times I've messaged Dr. Palazzo and said, hey, we have this position open. Can you help us find somebody? Here is our intent. Here's what we're looking for. And sometimes I'll get really honest feedback from Dr. Palazzo too, like, hey, you're not advertising this correctly, or you need to call this out a certain way. So I think being open to new ways of reaching out to the candidates is extremely important. The way it worked maybe 10 years ago, when many of us started, isn't the same path forward today. And so we need to be open to how we reach the next couple of generations and so on and so forth. We haven't taken the TikTok route yet, but who knows, maybe one day we will do that as well. I also, as I said before, I think being aware and educated about the immigration process, just so it doesn't scare you when it hits your desk. That it's a very doable thing. It's something that can easily be supported. There are ways to maximize the return for both the organization and the individual. It's just a matter of having conversations when those resumes hit your desk. I think we all agree that we want to hire the best person. It doesn't matter. Everything else is secondary, but sometimes the best people get left out because of all these additional layers that we have to sift through and hoops that we have to jump through. So I'd say keep an open mind. If you get somebody like that across your desk and you don't know how to approach it, obviously we as panelists are here to offer our support on that end and share our experiences. So being open again to considering a variety of candidates is going to be extremely important.
And I'll just add, when it comes to the hiring, especially from the private side of things, be intentional about who you're searching for. If you're looking for minority candidates, are you just looking at the larger universities that are close by, or are you looking at HBCUs? Excuse me. Diversify your reach and figure out where are those candidates at. So they might not just be in your backyard. And so you have to be intentional about who you're looking for and who you want to hire. But more importantly, once you hire that person, how do you get them to retain and stay in that career? And I think that's really comes down to, are you empowering them in their profession? Are you keeping them at the low man on the totem pole doing, sort of the daily grunt work? Or are you actually putting them in positions of project manager, directors, things like that, putting them in front of making them the face of the projects, putting them out in front of the public to be the spokesperson for your companies. And so I think that's sort of the bridge from getting them into the entry-level position, but then actually giving them the skill set to grow within the company and actually make a difference and implement the changes that they're passionate about.
Josh, if I can just add one more thing to what Ryan said.
Sure.
Sometimes there is some extra effort needed, and I'm going to speak for myself. If I looked at myself when I started in this career, there were just so many things that I needed to work on. And I did, and I was able to only because I had a really good mentor, like Ryan was saying. I had a township manager that was willing to invest that time in me. And, I still reflect back at every single thing that he taught me, just from simple things to my accent and how people have a hard time understanding me if I don't slow down and talk. The things that were taught to me early in my career, the fact that he invested that time in me still means a lot to me today. So going back to Ryan's point about investing in the people, regardless of what it takes, I think is extremely important.
Thank you, Sharmali and Ryan. So this next question is actually going to be for both Dr. Hollstein and Dr. Palazzo. Now more than ever, due to population growth, climate change, and an ever-changing economy, fewer planners are facing tough questions to navigate the future for the best outcome as a world society. Other countries are outpacing the United States in the numbers of planners that are available per number of residents. How do you envision the United States if more planners do not step up to the plate?
Okay, yeah, I do have actually something that I want to share with all of you that was part of the analysis that we were making for the book. You can see here this is the ratio of planners and inhabitants in different countries. And so in US, for instance, we have one planner out of 8,500, while in UK is one every 2,500. Canada is half of the United States, and Australia even is almost half of UK. So one out of 1,400 inhabitants. And of course, then you have other countries where you have the one every 75,000 in India, or 186,000 in Kenya and Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And in these two diagrams, in some way, the first one speak to us as planner in United States and as educator in United States, that we need probably to have more planners in order to reach some other levels that in countries that we consider peer have already reached. The other scheme talks to us in terms of what we need or what we can do as educators, especially in some of this country. And all these data came from planners in those countries that wrote for us. So it is important to recognize that actually we need more planner, that if you combine the lack of awareness, the lack of diversity, the declining in terms of number in program, graduate or undergraduate urban planning programs, that looks like a recipe for failure. And as Josh said before, I mean, we are facing issues like climate change and social issues in our cities that actually need more planners, not less. And so I mean, this is pretty clearly it clearly explained, where we are now and where we want to go. Leah?
Yeah, I would just jump in that as there are less planners available to do the work, that will the work that only continues to increase, that other professions are going to jump into that gap, right? They are going to come in to do the work of planners, although these other professions are not trained as planners. And we already see this with architects and civil engineers and transportation engineers doing what is actually the work or should be the work of planners. And so the thing is, planning is located in that sort of gray area, as you mentioned earlier, where it's aligned with many other types of professions, all of which sort of threatens the identity of the profession and the avenue in which we work. And so, it really becomes a problem that we as a profession are not really even active as local or national or international planning associations on increasing awareness of the profession and reaching out to young people to get them engaged to help address this shortage that we're showing. Engineers and architects are very active in this area, and communications in these fields are the ones that are now the urban transformers of the future. So we need to be we need to be seen in that way, right? We need to be communicating better. We need to be positioning planning as the field that can help guide us to a more sustainable, more resilient, or just life sustaining future, instead of sort of leaving this gap to other allied professions.
And if I may add something, I mean, this is another slide that tells us, based on the Occupational Outlook Handbook, the Bureau of Labor statistics, you can see actually that one argument that someone might say, well, planners are, raising less money than architects or civil engineer or landscape architect. Well, that is not completely true. As you can see here, I mean, the median pay that you can see on the top of each of these four screenshots, they are pretty similar. So 79 versus 82 for architects, or even less for landscape architects, a little higher for civil engineers. So the argument that actually we are not, or that there are no jobs, or that actually the jobs pay less, it's not true based on this information. Plus, I want to show you, I want to just highlight that the job outlook for the 22-32 for 3 out of this 4 occupation is going fast as average. So 4%, 5%, the only occupation that actually has 1% is landscape architecture. So just, you know, food for thought.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Since we have about 20 minutes left, I'm going to open it up for some of the questions that we have received through the question and answer functionality. And so this first one is for Dr. Palazzo. There is an overall decline of enrollments in master programs. There is an overall decline of enrollments in master programs of urban planning in the United States. In your opinion, what are the reasons behind it?
So I would say that there are several reasons, but in the past, let's say 5 or 6 years, we have seen a decline of international students that were a significant portion of our graduate students. The reasons are many. The political situation in US, COVID, the tensions between China and US. A fourth one is that actually we have very good students with wonderful transcript from Africa, but they cannot come here because they are lacking of money and support. So we go back to money, even if we are talking about undergraduate. So, but these are my.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there is, and also we're just seeing a decline, you know, sort of the cohort of students, you know, on birth rates and those sort of things is declining a bit. And then, as Danilo mentioned, that we have a larger number of programs chasing after a smaller number of students. So, you know, so awareness. I mean, there's so many things going on here, all combining to really decrease those enrollments.
Thank you both for tag teaming on that question. Our next question, Dr. Palazzo talked a lot about implementation and impacts as being the exciting part of the planning field. For the others on the panel, do you think the planning profession needs to rethink its identity, rebrand, or aggressively market itself to attract young people and improve the diversity of those entering the profession?
Yeah, I would say absolutely to all of it. I think Dr. Hollstein mentioned, I don't know how many times the rest of you have gotten this, but I do get a lot. When I say I'm a planner, I do get, are you a wedding planner a lot? So there is a narrative about planning that needs to be changed. And so if this is the time and the opportunity for us to rebrand and rethink and remarket ourselves as a profession, then it's the perfect time to do it. So I'm sure all of us are kind of keeping up on the next set of generations, the millennials. Now we're talking about generation alpha, and all of these newer generations. I think Ryan pointed out, they're all wanting meaningful work. It's not about the money anymore, or it's not just about the money anymore. It's about value. It's about the work that they do, the meaningfulness of that work, and what is more apt than the planning profession in giving back to your community in different ways. So I think we have the perfect opportunity with the newer generations to kind of set the stage and the bar high when it comes to the planning profession.
Okay. Another question we have is, this person is curious if there are good ways to increase diversity in disability status or other non-obvious status like neurodiversity.
Maybe we're all stumped on this question.
Not sure how to answer this, but definitely disability and, or let's say, it goes into, I think, into the fact that we are, as planner, representing other, and they have to trust us for what we are. So if the planning profession is, the majority of the planner professions are white, middle-aged men, how they can represent a larger community. So when we talk about diversity, we may think about just diversity in terms of race or ethnicity, but we also talk about gender. We are talking about religion. We are talking about disability. So when we talk about diversity, actually, it would be not correct to just consider one side of diversity. So I think the question is relevant because, I mean, again, it leave us out of the just considering diversity just from a racial point of view.
Yeah, and I think if there's a particular demographic that, you know, you're trying to reach out to or hire, find the organizations who are already reaching out and working with those specific demographics, and then work with that organization themselves, who are actually doing a good job and doing it well. I think that's a way, because it's difficult to say, you know, I want to hire this particular candidate. If you don't work with those people, then, you know, it's hard to find that. So find those organizations who are already doing it and then bridge that gap that way, because then you'll have an established relationship that they know and trust. And then that way you can bridge that gap and then bring them on board that way.
Great. Thank you all. We're going to try to get to one more question from the audience. Are you aware of studies that examine what professions are successfully attracting DEI candidates to better understand who our competition is, and what is it about those professions that are attracting these candidates?
I don't know if I can answer this, but I can tell you, I mentioned before, especially for undergrad students, that we need to raise awareness, but at the same time, we want to attract a diverse group of students. The Hughes High School, the DEP Camp, and other initiatives, the Adopt a Class, are going out of this ivory towers, if you want, just to get the attention of a different population that usually come to college. What we have to convince, I think, is that planning is a profession that help, you know, community. It's not a B kind of category profession. And I do not know if actually architect has more, let's say, Black African-American architects or landscape architect. I think this is a problem that we have as in academy. I mean, we get two red flags from PAB in our last accreditation. One was the lack of diversity in students, and second was the lack of diversity in faculty. But I can assure you that we are trying our best to get one and the other, but it's hard for many, many reasons that actually probably there's no time to discuss. But I mean, those are, I would say, facts too.
Great. Thank you all. I'm going to wrap up the questions and answers from the audience, but I do have one final question for the entire panel. In one or two sentences, how can planners across academia, in the public sector, and in the private sector work together to attract DEI individuals into our profession?
I think that there have been a lot of ideas offered today by this panel about what can be done to attract DEI candidates or any candidates into the planning profession. I think what is most important is that we make an effort. I think we all get wrapped up in the next project, the next staff report, the next thing that has to be done, that we don't invest enough time in actually investing in the profession. And I am proud of my team here, my planning team here at PDS. They go to career fairs, they work with our local schools. In fact, Dr. Hollstein, you'll be happy to hear we're starting an Adopt a Class program. So we're doing everything we can to, to kind of keep this profession in the forefront. And so it's going to take some effort. And I think that's going to be important for all of us to put in.
Yeah, I think you have to make folks aware at a young age, the high school and undergraduate level and even graduate level age, make them aware of the planning profession. But then after that, it's really empowering them once they get into their career, but also turning that passion into a career. And I can make a livelihood off of this passion. And so once you really tap into that, what they're most passionate about, now I'm excited to, do this profession. And now I'm excited to attract other candidates who look like me to continue to do this work. And so again, it's how do you convert that passion into a career?
So I think my answer to that would be that I think we as planners need to be sort of more visible as a profession and about what we do and what we accomplish. The APA Ohio has a Because We Plan initiative, and it's sort of making people more aware that these wonderful urban spaces that we all love, these places we go to, these affordable housing and smart cities and these transportation, these things don't just happen. There are humans involved in the creation of all of these things. So this could happen, for example, Danilo had this idea of maybe we could write op-eds for the local newspaper on proposed projects, or when current events happening. We could talk to news channel to get the planning perspective on current events, anything to sort of increase the visibility of the profession as a viable alternative, but also a very human profession that people can participate in.
Yeah, I would add to that it starts from high schools. We have lost geography as one of the mandatory topic in high school, and that was one entry point to understand planning and to get interested in human geography, human community, and so on. The relation with the public school systems is another important element with the students, with the parents, with the counselors, and so the Adopt a Class is a wonderful program for that. And I will reiterate what Leah said in terms of being visible. I think that our professional planners was always behind the scene, and that didn't help us in improving our social relevance in some way. I mean, we are relevant, but there are then other professions that actually looks like they have done what we in some way have helped to or support to. You see a building, oh, you think architecture. I mean, you see a construction site, you think, oh, engineering. So it's hard to think when you see a good street scape or a new park and say, oh, this was the outcomes of a planner. So we need to be more evident. We need to be more visible. And I think that something that we have to learn maybe from other professions, taking again what Josh asked before. I mean, the IIA, the American Institute of Architects, they have in Chicago, when you go there, you go and you see, you do a boat tour that is organized by the IIA. Why not, APA doesn't have something like that when you visit Chicago or you visit New York or you visit Houston or even Cincinnati? I mean, why not? I mean, why not having planners that actually bring people around? And that would be a way, to show what we have done good or what we have done bad, in our cities.
Great. Thank you all so very much today. And we had a lot of great questions, and some of which we did not get to. But Kareem has dropped the email addresses of our panelists into the comment box. So please feel free to reach out to any one of those today. And again, if you are seeking AICP credits, this session is eligible. Please feel free to watch this webinar again or share it with a friend or colleague at our website, APA-KY.org, once we have it posted in a few days. I'd like to thank Dr. Leah Hollstein with the University of Cincinnati, Dr. Danilo Palazzo with the University of Cincinnati, Sharmali Reddy, Executive Director of Planning and Development Services of Kenton County, and Ryan Holmes with EHI Consultants. I'd like to thank you, Sharmali, for organizing this great panel today. And I would like to thank Mr. Kareem Simpson for our Q&A and technical support. I would also like to thank the entire DEI committee, which is my co-chair, Samantha Castro, Sharmali Reddy, Ryan Holmes, Kareem Simpson, and Tom West. And finally, I would like to thank you, the audience. So the APA Kentucky DEI webinar series will continue to discuss the planning profession through the lens of equity and inclusivity, and we want to hear from you. What topics should we discuss as we move APA Kentucky forward? Please feel free to email myself at jsummer@paducahky.gov or Samantha Castro at scastro@tsw-design.com to let us know. Well, we will be back in December where we will be discussing DEI and comprehensive plans. For more information on future sessions, to access the recording from this webinar, or to learn more about DEI topics in Kentucky, please visit APA-KY.org. Thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us, and we'll see you next time.